Let's get started, and good morning, guys.
Good morning.
And we'll be looking at Genesis chapter 50 this morning, verses 12 through 14. So if someone could just turn there and get ready to read, I'll make a few comments, and then we'll get started through reading that. Well, first of all, before we read that text, the review from last week, we're looking at the events post Jacob's death. The boys were charged with bringing their father's remains back to the land, to the family burial site, which is a place called Machpelah, which is in Hebron. And so the boys took their dad's body back, and they and buried the remains there at that location. So we've been looking at that journey. And what we looked at last week was the beginning of that whole section where Jacob is now expired, and he is requested for the family to go on this journey. And there are times in our lives where we are called, a lot of times unexpectedly, to what we called last week full stops, which is the British English word for the punctuation period. We call it a period, they call it a full stop. And so I really kind of gravitated towards that idea and built on that idea of the full stops that come to our lives on occasion and how we respond to those things. And that's what this was for. The idea being that the natural tendency within us is to keep bullying our way through and not to arrive at a full stop. And that's unfortunate, and we lose a lot of what life has to offer by not yielding to that necessary stop that comes into our life. So that was really in a short fix what we talked about last week. So could we have somebody read verses 12 through 14 of Genesis chapter 50?
Thus his sons did for him as he had commanded them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field at Machpelah to the east of Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite, possessed as a burying place.
Okay.
And wait a minute. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury his father.
Okay, good. So they finally arrive, and that's what we're going to talk about this morning. I wanted to just kind of lay out. It is not real clear after studying the exact route they took. The traditional route, clear from Syria to Egypt, who were these two areas, the Fertile Crescent area, Mesopotamia area, down to Egypt. Those were the two world powers at this time, and they created a interstate freeway called the Via Maris, the Way of the Sea. And the Via Maris came right down through here, right along the eastern edge of the Mediterranean. Well, what complicates it, here's Goshen, here's where they were, and here's Hebron. And what complicates this routing is the fact that it says in verse 11 of chapter 50, they went to a place called Atad, and the threshing floor, and there they wept, and it's beyond Jordan, which means trans-Jordan. So they ended up coming over here, trans-Jordan. Here's the Jordan River, and they spent some time there in mourning, and then they went from there over to Hebron here, which is where the burial site is. So how they actually did this, I have no idea. I don't know if anybody really knows, and it's really secondary to the discussion. But even the shortest distance of this, here's the point. The shortest distance is about 350 miles. Okay, 350 miles that they walked carrying the remains of Jacob. That is the idea that I'd like you to have in your heads this morning. 350 miles, minimum. It's, you don't do that over a weekend. That took a while. So the fact is, this was a long walk. And therefore, this walk provided ample time for reflection and discussion. Can you imagine two of the brothers, packing along, and one says to the other, "Hey, Issachar, do you remember the time?" Okay. While they're walking along. You're remembering Dad, remembering what it was like to be raised in the family. Remembering. Okay, there is where we want to be today. The power of memories is what we're going to look at today. Have you ever had a memory arise? It's something, an old song, an old rock and roll song of the 60s or 70s plays, and it just explodes memories in your mind of where you were. You can almost feel the temperature, the conversation and the smells, because of the power of memory to recall times. And of course, there's a huge correlation with that as far as my understanding, and what we've studied here is blessing. Dick and I were talking about blessings this morning and the memories that those evoke post blessing. But we're going to look at the power of memories this morning via a video clip that I weaved together from an old TV series called Lost. And I don't know if any of you guys ever watched Lost, but it's one of my favorite TV series. What's that?
Hard to figure out.
Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of theories on that. But I decided to write out what I was writing because I'm weaving clips together to create a short story, and unless you know the backdrop, it wouldn't make much sense. So, the scene 1 in the clip, we see a young Jack Shepherd, who is one of the main characters in the TV series. He's a doctor, and he's a kid, so it's a flashback in the series. And he's on the ground, and he's watching his friend get beat up, and by some bullies. And then he gets up and he attempts to help his friend, and he suffers the consequences of that. And then what I did is I put in then scene 2. He's got home that evening, and his dad is in his chair, who's also a doctor. And his dad has a scotch, and he's in his study, and he says, "You want to come in? Tell me what happened." Jack's got a black eye. And he tells his dad what happened, and his dad gives him some counsel. Okay. And that counsel really stuck with Jack and informs him as a grown man. I've got a really quick clip attached to here where we now fast forward and see the full-grown Jack Shepherd as he's thinking about what happened years and years and years ago. So that's what you got to know, that it's a flashback. Well, then finally, scene 3 comes in. This is where we want to go with this. Is that the story Lost, and where Jack Shepherd is in the show, in the series, is he's with a group of other people that have crashed on an island, and they're surviving, and that's where the series begins, and it went for several years, and they're all trying to figure it out. This scene 3 is very early into the series, and these people are just like any group in any kind of situation. They're formulating how they're going to operate, and of course the big question is leadership. And Jack is in this scene. He's talking with John Locke, who is another character, and Jack are talking about this very subject, about the others, and Jack's role within the others. And I'd like for you to focus in on that conversation as John Locke is trying to communicate Jack what the role he needs to assume within the community, and Jack's reluctance, and how that ties back to the first scene that you will see here just shortly. Okay? All right. Yeah, I feel it. Yeah. I thought that went pretty good, by golly. You get a lot more out of it if you know the background. Okay, so we're gonna watch that here, and hopefully the sound works.